Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Tuesday, May 20th. We've reached the second decade, I guess, of the calendar days of May. I don't know. Is that a thing? All right. Well, time for us to get going once again, and things haven't gotten much better in terms of the current president of the United States being a mush-brained idiot who has no idea what's going on in the world, and he's yet involved intimately, as is necessary for the president of the United States, in peace negotiations, or what is hoped to be ceasefire negotiations in a major war in Europe. Also, I guess he's really supposed to be involved in ceasefire negotiations in a major war in the Middle East as well. And, he's sort of absent mentally from all of these things. And so, of course, the major news outlets in this country covering that they think that maybe the previous president, who isn't president anymore and hasn't been for 4 months, and that's a fairly significant period of time, and who didn't run for re-election in the end, he may have, what if he was in mental decline in ways that they didn't fully disclose to the American people so that they could choose to vote for the other person who was running instead of him, or something like that. And yet, here we are. It's one of those things. I know you get down a rabbit hole and you just sort of think that that's the most important thing in the world, and parsing everything and splitting every hair becomes extremely important to you. You just, news people need to, I guess, take a step back from this. And of course, it would probably help to realize, well, maybe it's not the ultimate sin in the world to have not given you what you wanted when you wanted it, and there might be other things going on in the world, and maybe you should pay attention to them. I don't know. Anyway, lots happening, some of greater import than others, on the ridiculous and silly side, but also, mounting evidence for the unfitness of office of the current president, the person who's actually president of the United States now. I guess word is that, and it shouldn't surprise us, but I guess it still does a little bit for some strange reason. Word is that the plane that we figured, I guess, from the story being told, and we should have realized that initially the story was being told from the Trump White House, but that the story was that, he had gone to visit all of his good friends, his very rich friends. He kept saying that so often in so many interviews with American press, that it was really important, for whatever reason, for everyone to know that the people he was visiting were really rich. And I think in his mind, it was supposed to mean, well, they're really rich, so they can do lots of things. So they should do these things. They should be working on finding ways to end wars in the Middle East and settle those issues, and of course change the balance of trade internationally, et cetera, and invest in the United States. And that was all because they were very rich. And in his mind, that's the same thing as being very powerful. And, you can't blame him. This is the United States, and he's the president. Just look at that. That's pretty ridiculous all by itself. But so the story was, and for some reason I didn't store it away because maybe it wasn't as surprising to me as I thought. But the story in CNN now is, all right, well, or I guess I should say the story that was originally that Trump visited his very rich friends in the Middle East, and one of them was so rich and so nice and liked him so much that they said, you know what, I'll bet you've been having such trouble getting a new Air Force One built by Boeing because they're so terrible and everybody hates them, but give me a plane. And we're sorry to see you have to wait. We want you to be comfortable. Why don't you we're going to give you one of our fabulously appointed ultra luxury 747s that we've decked out for the royal family because we love you. You're great. You're a wonderful person, and we don't want you to be uncomfortable. And this is befitting a president of the United States. It really isn't, but that would be the line. Anyway, and of course, then we all reacted. Hey, that would be a huge violation of our Constitution. Hey, that would be physically impossible to turn one of these planes into a functioning Air Force One type plane without stripping it down and basically building a new plane from the ground up. There's no savings involved. There's nothing involved. And of course, it's also a huge vector for corruption. I mean, it's not even a vector. It is like it embodies this corruption. The idea that the benefactors here said, well, actually, we'd like you to just take the thing when you leave office. We want to gift it to you in such a way that you can use it as an official plane while you're president, and then when you're not president, you can just keep it as a parting gift to you. And that does seem a little ridiculous, don't you think? Well, anyway, it turns out that there's a new twist on it. CNN reporting that sources now contradicting Trump's narrative. I can't believe that would happen. They're contradicting Trump's narrative about Qatar offering a plane as a gift. What is this all about? Well, I guess long story short on this one is Trump saw these things and I guess always coveted them because they were super ultra luxury, even though they're very dated in their look for one thing, and over the top. But that's the Trump decorating style, so it was very enticing to him. Well, now I'd like to know what that plane was doing parked at the West Palm Beach airport. Although I suspect, given what we learned in the second round of these stories, which was that the Qataris were, not desperate to, but very interested in unloading these planes and downsizing their fleet. And it just made no particular sense at all for them to maintain so many of these things. It was actually costing them money just to not fly the thing, to mothball it, to store it. They had put it on the market. They couldn't sell it. Maybe they actually did bring it to West Palm Beach and park it there. I don't remember hearing, reports, but if it's a lesser royal, perhaps we wouldn't have heard these reports, or maybe they were reported and we just didn't notice that a lesser royal of the Qatari royal family flew to, who knows, maybe he actually just went to Mar-a-Lago, either just as a tourist destination. I can't believe it. I'm taking pictures. Isn't this cheesy? It's like taking selfies in Disneyland. This is ridiculous. I'm at Mar-a-Lago. Or he was actually trying to influence the president. That could also be a possibility. But they may have flown the jet there to put it there so that Trump would see it and say, ooh, I want that. And then maybe they'd be able to sell the thing. But instead it backfired, I guess. And he saw it, and circumstances were such that they ended up offering to give him the plane. But, right, like we said, in the second round of stories, it made a certain amount of financial sense to them to do that. I mean, clearly they would gain some influence over Trump, and that, although that is an interesting twist on the very, the question being asked about the nature of the transaction, which it is a transaction, and even who was that on? Was it? I don't remember which cabinet secretary or Trump official was on TV over the weekend, calling it a transaction, which is probably not good for, if you were ever to be tried in any way for this transaction is not something you want to cop to. Well, they were just giving it to us for no reason. They like him a lot. They didn't want anything from it, i.e., a two-way street, a transaction. But you described it that way. But it is possible that, the insinuation is, well, we wouldn't just be giving it to him for no reason. They would clearly want something in this quid pro quo. What's the quo? Although it now seems at least possible that maybe, in fact, there wasn't a quid pro quo in this sense. They would love to get something and probably expected to get something out of Trump, even if it's just favorable consideration. But it wasn't like they were taking $400 million and just putting it in a bag and giving it to Trump. $400 million they could have used elsewhere. And so they're parting with something, and they would naturally want something in return. It was so costly for them to maintain this plane ready for sale, and they had been trying for 5 years to sell it without any success. And it's an extremely limited market for a plane like that. And they just said, at some point, if we give it away, at least we eliminate the expense. We'll never recoup our $400,000 investment, if there was one. But we'll stop paying for storage or maintenance or advertising expenses to try to sell this thing, and we'll make this idiot Trump happy, and he won't, he may or may not be able to use the plane ever anyway, but who cares? So maybe, in that sense, they could protect themselves from the quid pro quo accusation. Anyway, so now the news story turns out to be that it wasn't that Trump was so beloved by the Qataris and so respected that they offered him this plane just to make him happy, but that he showed up and said, boy, I would really love to have one of these planes. And my assumption is that the discussion, if there was one, was, a little bit more along the lines of, is there something, use the Gilbert Gottfried idea here from Beverly Hills Cop 2. Is there something here parked at this airport that if you were to park it at my airport and give me the keys to it, that I would be favorably inclined towards deals with you or selling you weapons or taking your side in some international affair? I don't know, maybe in the shape of a gigantic jumbo jet with 4 engines or something like that. You like 4. I like 4 engines, not 1. And that he had asked for this plane, and he basically went begging for this plane. He would say, if it were anyone else, and he went to Qatar and he's begging like a dog for this plane, and they gave it to him because they felt so sorry for this loser. And, well, that's apparently what happened. CNN's Alex Marquardt, Kirsten Holmes, and Natasha Bertrand get the byline on sources contradict Trump narrative about Qatar offering a plane as a gift. The Trump administration first approached Qatar to inquire about acquiring, I like that, a Boeing 747 that could be used as Air Force One by President Donald Trump. 4 sources familiar with the discussions told CNN. That's contrary to the narrative from the president that Qatar reached out and offered the jet as a, quote, gift to him. And by the way, if that's not striking you as every bit as lurid, and the president lied and deceived us and sent us on a wild goose chase and covered up what really happened here, as, oh my gosh, Joe Biden is old. If that's the kind of story you're after, here's one. The president told a whole tale about how they respected him so much they were going to give him this beautiful, fabulous plane, and it wasn't going to cost anything. And in fact, he just went sniffing around Qatari luxury planes and said, can I get one of these? Can you give me one, though? Because we're not going to buy it from you. For me, it's a power thing for you to give it to me. After Trump took office in January, the Pentagon contacted Boeing and was told the company would not be able to deliver the new jets it was building to replace the aging presidential planes for another 2 years, sources said. And I could be dead from an aneurysm before then. So hurry up. The Trump administration, however, wanted a replacement plane much faster. Everybody does, apparently, in the Trump administration. Kristi Noem wants a $50 million jet, whatever, for no reason. Anyway, they wanted one much faster, and the Air Force was exploring different options for doing so. And by the way, probably not on the table, buying a commercially available luxury jet for way too much money from somebody else, a foreign government, in fact, and stripping it all the way down to the airframe and then rebuilding it back up again, because that's not any faster. That's probably slower. Like if you're going to build a plane from the ground up, that's going to take X amount of time. But if you build a plane from the ground up, but before you do that, you have to strip a plane down from the top down to the ground, well, that's extra time. That's going to be X plus Y amount of time. Not good. Anyway, the Trump administration wanted a replacement plane much faster, and the Air Force was exploring different options for doing so. At the same time, Trump tasked his Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, who wasn't busy spit-shining Vladimir Putin's boots at the time, I guess, with finding a list of viable planes A senior White House official told CNN. Now, that's really something. What a job for him. I guess it makes sense because he says, well, the richest people with the most beautiful planes are in the Middle East. You're my envoy to the Middle East. Go make a list. But if you think about it, his portfolio is dealing with Russia over everything, but I guess most particularly about Ukraine, one of the most, critical things happening in world affairs, and also dealing with all of the Middle East over the other most critical thing possibly happening on the face of the earth, both in your hands. But also, I need to shop for a luxury plane. And could you do that for me in your spare time? Sure. Although, I guess, like I said, the reality of it is if you wanted the most opulent and ridiculous aircraft possible, and a very, very corrupt person who wouldn't mind being involved in a huge violation of the United States Constitution, what would they care? Because they're not a party of the United States Constitution. Where would you be most likely to find that combination of over-the-top opulence and unconcern about corruption? And the answer would be Russia or the Middle East. So I guess Steve Witkoff is the guy to call, but you'd think he'd maybe put an assistant on that. After the Pentagon's initial engagement with the company, Boeing provided U.S. defense officials with a list of other Boeing clients around the world with planes that could work in the meantime, 3 of the sources said. And I'm surprised that they even admitted that there were such things. And Qatar was one of the clients. A second source familiar with the discussion said, adding the Pentagon offered to buy the plane, and Qatar indicated it was willing to sell it, which would have at least been a more obvious transaction and above board. The Pentagon had launched the discussions with Qatar after learning that the White House supported the idea, a third source familiar said, and Witkoff helped facilitate the initial conversations, the White House official said. Again, based on the background we've read already, I find that, maybe that background is inaccurate, or there's or it's just not, either it didn't happen that way, or the description of why the barriers to turning this plane into a functioning Air Force One weren't explained in the correct way, and I didn't grasp it the right way. But it seems to me like, no real Air Force person or Pentagon source would have gone down this path except to humor the White House here. A third source recalled that the initial discussions were about leasing the plane rather than buying it outright, but Trump has repeatedly described the potential deal as a gesture or contribution from Qatar's royal family. Contribution to what? I don't know. All caps as he posted on his social media site, a gift free of charge. And he said it would be a temporary replacement for Air Force One and given to his presidential library, that one book, after he leaves office. But he denied he would fly in the plane then. But, of what use is that promise? The details on the administration outreach sheds new light on the origins of the potential transfer of the jet, which provoked a political furor, not furor, but furor, that threatened to overshadow Trump's trip to the Middle East last week, but it didn't do it. It did for us. Democrats and several influential Republicans who are normally staunch supporters of the president have said they oppose the potential deal on ethical grounds. Qatar also faced a backlash with Democratic lawmakers threatening to hold up weapons sales to the Gulf country. I'm probably not going to go that much further, although I do notice that there's a second section here that says lawyers are still hashing out the deal. And, that too, maybe we'll mention that only because, not for the content of it, because who cares? They're lying about what they're working on in the deal. But it's interesting the cover that they get from, again, still, mainstream news outlets unprepared to deal with the reality of what's going on here. They just write, well, lawyers are still hashing out the deal. Yeah, well, what you mean is there are people who graduated from law school and at one point were members of the bar somewhere, presumably. Not always still members, some of them. Some of the people he relies on for legal advice being disbarred. But when they say lawyers are hashing out the deal, that's a loaded statement. It's supposed to be taken as people who, have respect for the law and the rule of law are trying to make this thing compliant with the current state of the law. And there's really no way to do that. So what's really happening again here is people like Pam Bondi and others, who are lawyers, shouldn't be, but currently still are lawyers, are willing to say on paper with letterhead that looks like they gave thought and meaningful thought to what was going on, will say, look, I don't know what kind of gobbledygook you want to hear from me, but in the end, I'm going to put this down. It's perfectly legal and constitutional for him to do this. To do what? What are the terms of the deal? I don't know. Whatever it is he does, it's perfectly legal. Well, one, he's the president, and two, come on, it's free or whatever. Anyway, the point is, to the extent that there's a problem and you're worried about the Constitution, I, as the Attorney General of the United States of America, hereby declare this to be constitutional. And if the courts don't agree, then they are wrong and maybe even traitors. Thank you for your attention to this matter. As he signs all of his things, as though they were complaints to a manager of a grocery store. Grocery, interesting word I just invented. Very old-fashioned. People don't know about it. Right. So anyway, I don't know. This reminded me the fact that they had put this section here. Lawyers still hashing out the deal, which they're working on things, words that'll go in a memo, but they don't mean anything. Reminded me of something I saw on social media this morning about a different story that I wasn't planning to spend a great deal of time on, but there is this news and this reaction to it. Jake Tapper, not about his book, but reacting instead to the news of Wendy McMahon of CBS News stepping down from her position, CBS CEO, stepping down and over the 60 Minutes situation and the loss of journalistic freedom and integrity at the network, etc. Jake Tapper reacting to this news, saying a source close to the negotiations tells me Paramount and CBS could settle with President Trump for as much as $30 to $50 million. I guess that over this, his claim that they had edited the 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris during the campaign, and others pointing out, correctly, as who's this here? Patrick Chovanec, maybe? I don't know. I'm not Chovanec. Chovanec, with whom I am, I think, not personally familiar, but let's take a peek. An economist, by the way, and pointing out this is a personal payday for the president, correct? Based on concerns that he might use his official powers to block a business deal. How is this different from extortion? Good point. Also, our good friend, who we do know, Grudgy the Whale, Grudgy on Blue Sky Social now, having transferred over from the bad place, pointing out, well, one, it's easy to forget what this is about, but this is about the president of the United States extorting a news organization for doing an interview with his political opponent, and that is effed up beyond belief. And the media just reports it like it's a normal dispute. And just putting a finer point on it, he's saying, I can't get over how this gets covered. It gets covered like a regular lawsuit settlement. But the lawsuit itself, I would add, is outrageous fascist insanity, and it never gets covered that way. That's the good point here, right? Like what they're really, Jake Tapper is saying, well, a source tells me that they could settle with the president. They're in settlement negotiations. Yes, they are. And again, the loaded terminology here, we're conditioned to believe because of, 200 and something years of normalcy. When there is a lawsuit going on and the two sides are discussing a settlement, it's because they both have a basic fundamental understanding of the state of the law, and they both are rationally seeking a way to avoid further costly litigation, and they're going to come to a conclusion that rests somewhere in between the two parties' positions, both in the realm of normalcy. But that's not what's happening here. I mean, essentially, if the president files suit, Trump files suit against CBS and says, I own CBS. I'm suing CBS and all CBS shareholders for fraud. The entire ownership of CBS should be transferred to me personally at the Trump organization. Just sign it all over. And also, as part of my lawsuit, I demand that every CBS employee chop off their left leg and eat it themselves. Self-cannibalism. It's just That's what I'm asking for. It's a little crazy, but that's what I'm asking for. And CBS says, well, that's a little nutty. We're not going to eat the legs. And we object to the idea that we don't own CBS. You do. But we would consider making a cash settlement with you in order for you to leave us alone, for instance. Even though really we should be saying, actually, this should be a call to arms. Americans should arm themselves and overthrow this government. There's a insane mad king in charge here. But I tell you what, we'll bring this back to the realm of normalcy. We'll offer you some sort of cash settlement to make this whole crazy thing go away because it's very frightening. Headline, the parties are in settlement negotiations. It ignores the real story in which the President of the United States demands that CBS employees self-cannibalize, literally eat their own amputated left legs. And it has to be the left leg. Don't undersell this. I want it to be very specific. Left leg. I'm not giving in on this. But is that really the headline? Is that really the story here, that they're in settlement negotiations? No, not really. I think this should probably be reported differently. But, what are we going to do? We don't have that kind of press, and they don't have that kind of language or ability. All right. Well, nearly time for our first break. So, too much time wasted on that. But it does pay every once in a while to stop and remind ourselves how crazy this place is and how ill-equipped our, current media environment is for reporting what's actually going on. But, they still cover some other things fairly well, and so we'll tell you the story of what's going on Capitol Hill. The one big, beautiful bill did, in fact, make it through committee the other day, but we left off, I think, telling the story of the non-profit killer provision of the bill and how it allowed Trump to more or less unilaterally remove people's tax-exempt status. We have an update on that for you after this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. All right, so yeah, it's the plane thing is still a little bit crazy, but as I said, we have an update on what happened or what we reported yesterday from Capitol Hill, and I guess we didn't get all the way through the backgrounder bill or the backgrounder on this non-profit killer provision, but well, maybe we did actually. Now that I think about it, but there was another. Yeah, there were a couple of articles that I started to read, and I thought, we could do with some further reading and clarification on this. But here's the new news from The Intercept. Tells us, and maybe the headline is all we need, but I'm a little bit curious about it. Nonprofit killer provision quietly disappears from Trump's big, beautiful bill. That's just scare quotes, big, beautiful bill. Trump tried to sneak the controversial measure in, but after a far-right Republican tanked the larger bill, or after Republicans, multiple, tanked the larger bill, the nonprofit provision disappeared. Oh, okay. So maybe is that part of the cost of getting it through committee? That would be remarkable if the Republicans who held out said, well, that's part of the price, at least, for our agreeing to vote present in committee so that you can get this thing reported out favorably. I mean, you'd think the far right folks would be even more fascist about this. Occasionally you get, anomalies like Rand Paul, but he's in the Senate, so it wasn't him. But maybe you have somebody who thinks of themselves in the Rand Paul mold and says, yeah, actually, that's actually quite a leap of faith to be taken. You don't want the president to have this power. Think about what would happen if a Democrat had this power. But most Republicans by this point, MAGA Republicans, know to laugh at that and say, well, no Democratic president would have that power. One, because they'd be afraid to exercise it. And two, because we'll probably revoke it before leaving office. We have no intention, in other words, of, we don't game this thing out in terms of what will this look like in the hands of a Democratic president, because we don't actually intend to allow a Democratic president to wield this power this way. This is strictly for Republican presidents, or maybe even strictly just for Donald Trump. But, they never admit to that, or I guess very rarely admit to that openly. So that's left to us to speculate. Anyway, as the Intercept reports it, and I missed the headline, it's Noah Hurwitz, the byline for this. An effort to empower President Donald Trump to target his ideological enemies in the nonprofit sector stalled when Trump's sprawling agenda-setting mega bill faced opposition from far-right Republicans in the House. Now, with an amended version of the longer bill inching toward approval, the push to target nonprofits appeared to suffer a major setback. The latest draft of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and they are calling it that. That's the working title of the bill. It's quite sad and ridiculous. But, I've seen dumber names, certainly, when you try to make an acronym out of the bills in particular. But this, too, just a ridiculous concession to and normalization of Trump's wacko speech, right? I think it should be called the Gulf of America, and everybody should have said, yeah, well, very interesting and all, but we know what the name of the thing is. Everyone sort of generally accepted that this is the name. So, that's an interesting thought, sir, but whatever. But instead they hop to, and they start calling it that, and then he gets the idea. Well, we can pressure people, I'll F up your business using the power of the federal government unless you, the map people, start putting Gulf of America on your maps. And it's not really a thing, but he's able to do these things. And for him to say, well, we're going to put it all in one big, beautiful bill. All right, that's one thing. But then he starts saying, I call it the One Big Beautiful Bill. And then he starts either hinting, or people get the hint, without us having to say so. I think you should start calling it the One Big Beautiful Bill. And as a matter of fact, why isn't the title of this bill the One Big Beautiful Bill Act? Which, wait a minute, you can't even really name anything a bill act. It's a bill before you pass it, and it becomes an act when you're done passing it and it's signed into law. But whatever. So, sure, why not? The One Big Loaf of Bread French Toast Act. It's a transformative thing, but whatever. And so you're not going to get any sensible thought out of Republicans passing this thing as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. That's just purely blowing smoke up Trump's ass. Which, whatever. Anyway, the latest draft of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which passed the House Budget Committee on Sunday night, no longer includes a provision that critics have dubbed the nonprofit killer. The measure, which has surfaced in several different forms over the past 2 years, would grant the Secretary of the Treasury Department broad powers to strip nonprofits' tax-exempt status by labeling them as a terrorist-supporting organization. with little in the way of due process or evidentiary standards. Good thing to point out. It was not immediately clear why the provision was absent from the latest draft of the bill, but a Democratic congressional aide said the removal was was indeed a deliberate move by the GOP, as we call them. Apparently, Republican staffers removed it after hearing about it from stakeholders and working with leadership on a solution, but I'm not sure what the solution is, the source told The Intercept. The removal of the clause prompted cautious optimism from civil society advocates. That's an interesting label there for civil society. I'm an advocate for civil society, just generally speaking. You have to be an active advocate for that now because there's active advocacy for the other side. I'm not for civil society. We should have something different. Well, anyway, cautious optimism, and that's probably wise because it is possible that the solution is, and that perhaps even that the demand from the far-right holdouts was, no, this needs to be more egregious. We don't know yet. But that cautious optimism diagnosis, I guess, was according to one Kia Hamadanchi, the senior policy counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union. It's possible, she says, they took it out to rewrite it in some way because we know that this package is going to be amended, she told The Intercept. But for now, it is not. Now that I think about it, I've once again assumed gender, Kia. That makes it sound like either she's a woman or a car. I am not sure which. But at any rate, for now, it is not in the text of the bill, and that's an improvement from where we were last week. All right, there's a little bit more about this. The latest push to get the nonprofit killer clause into law, appeared on page 380 of a 389-page bundle of amendments. That's just the amendments put forward by the GOP-controlled House Ways and Means Committee last week and passed out of committee intact after far-right Republicans opposed to government spending, like in general, probably, stalled the mega bill. The section on nonprofits appears to have been removed from an updated version put out Monday by the House Committee on Rules. Proponents of the provision have been trying for well over a year to make it law, an effort that critics have described as an assault on free speech aimed in particular at pro-Palestine groups. First introduced in late 2023, the initial version of the bill passed the House with overwhelming support from Democrats and Republicans alike. Pay attention, guys. In the wake of Trump's re-election victory, however, and in the face of a concerted campaign by the ACLU and other civil society groups, many Democrats changed their tune. That's good. When the last version of the bill, H.R. 9495, that's a high bill number, was introduced in November, Representative Lloyd Doggett of Texas marshaled opposition to the measure and even managed to vote it down in one floor vote. Good news there, at least temporarily. The Republican-controlled House, however, pressed on, and the bill eventually passed with near-unanimous GOP support and with the help of a handful of Democrats, but ultimately stalled in the Senate without becoming law. The big, beautiful bill passed a major... We should stop calling it that. If you're just using the word beautiful over and over again, that's crazy. But okay, you have to know what you're talking about. This stupid bill, the Giant Stupid Bill Act, I guess, passed a major hurdle over the weekend after an initial attempt by 4 hardline conservatives to block the package. Opponents of the nonprofit killer clause are not counting it out just yet, though, according to Hamadanchi. We are continuing to track things. He said, there's the answer. So he's a car, Kia. All right, well, maybe... it's also possible that it's short for something. I've run into that a couple of times. Where the name is shortened and it ends on an A, and that makes it look like the traditionally feminine form of Western names anyway. And nope, not at all. So thanks, Intercept, for pointing that out. We are continuing to track things. He said, in case this thing comes back from the dead, as it has numerous times. Okay, so just an update. Still in flux, but out. But there's no reason given for its removal. There's no indication that the Republicans who were opposed to the progress of the bill at the time had any concerns whatsoever about that provision. And it may just even be a mistake. Like, all right, this bill's too long. It's 389 pages. Or this list of amendments is too long. Chop off the last 100 pages. All right. That includes eliminating the nonprofit killer provision. Oh, well, we didn't intend to do that. put it back in. One more page won't hurt at this stage of the game. So I wouldn't be celebrating that they had come to see the light in any way. That's not the intention. And hopefully not even the intention of the reporting. Okay, Kia, thanks for joining us. It's a cool name. Sure, why not? The Democratic Mercedes Schlapp, I guess. See what we did there? All right, so a couple other stories maybe of some importance somewhere along the line. I think what reminded me of this as we were reading through. Can't remember exactly what it was that triggered my memory of, oh yeah, you should also be talking about, gosh, it might not be a great thing that we've progressed to the stage where the fascist-leaning Trump administration is saying, we're going to arrest the Democrats, because it's now reaching that stage. Although I have seen, I don't mean to, certainly this is not offered as any sort of apology for the Trump administration or an excuse for what they're doing, but I did see people posting on Blue Sky this morning saying we're at the point where the Trump administration is literally, and I mean if you're going to use the term literally, is literally, and then asterisks surrounding the word, arresting Democrats. And I mean, hello, how could this not be setting off alarm bells everywhere? And it makes you pause and say, wow, they haven't arrested her. They've charged her. That's terrible. And it usually leads to an arrest in a normal world. And they may very well try to do that and to make an arrest and an arraignment and then presumably release her on her own recognizance pending trial. But you see, we shouldn't be getting to that stage of the game. What's going on? Representative LaMonica McIver, charged by the DOJ over the incident with ICE agents at the detention facility in Newark, for which they originally did, in fact, arrest the mayor of Newark, Ras Baraka, and then release him. And then the news came that they are going to drop those charges, as only makes sense, against the mayor, but that they were going to press ahead with charges against LaMonica McIver, and still pending a decision on whether or not to press charges, those similar charges, against the other two members of Congress who were also involved in that incident, only one of which I can recall instantly now that I think about it. Bob Menendez's son, Rob, who now holds his House seat, or the House seat that he once held when he moved over to the Senate. And who else was there? I can't even remember. When I say it, I'll say, oh yeah, when it's if it's mentioned in this story. So anyway, you can't be out there saying they've literally, don't use the word literally, arrested or are threatening to arrest. You can say they're literally threatening to arrest, but you can't say they're literally arresting Democrats yet. Although, again, I don't really mean to hold you to account. That's not where we should be spending our time saying, we're the more accurate. Okay. It's excusable for sure to get to this stage. Anyway, so Representative LaMonica McIver, charged by DOJ over incident with ICE agents. And it is, of course, noted top legal scholar Alina Habba, who is making these decisions as U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey. Representative LaMonica McIver was charged on Monday, for allegedly assaulting law enforcement officers outside of an ICE detention facility earlier this month. It's quite ridiculous. Every bit as ridiculous as the charges were originally against Ras Baraka. Although, again, I point out that Congressman Dan Bishop, of North Carolina, still felt comfortable posting on Twitter that the assaults perpetrated by these Democrats were, in fact, worse than 9/11. And then, of course, video of Ras Baraka's alleged infringement came out, in which he comes to the gate and says, will you let me in the gate? And they say, okay, and they open it up and he walks through. Worse than 9/11. It feels like it wasn't, really. And I don't know. They were embarrassed, I suppose, by the footage that became available, and have said, all right, fine, we're not going to press these charges. But it's McIver's activity that they were at one point, and still to this moment are, I guess, still willing to describe as her having body slammed federal agents there. And there's, anybody who knows anything about, I don't know what, pro wrestling, I guess, there's no body slam that goes on here. There's footage available of what LaMonica McIver was doing there, and nothing in it approaches body slamming, of course. And look at this. As I'm waiting to read the article, the ABC News video is scrolling through the other stories, and they have video of the Mexican Navy tall ship accidentally backing up into the Brooklyn Bridge, and it's quite ridiculous looking, and would be ludicrous, and I guess it still is, but would be more appropriate to be, I guess, laughing about if people hadn't been killed in this accident. But goodness, that must have been just wild as hell to be like, are they going to back up into this? They are. They did. Well, look at that. The masts broke. That is really something. You don't see that every day. Anyway, back to the other story. I guess the footage appears to all normal eyes, I guess, to certainly vindicates McIver's defense against body slamming anybody, but she is, she's trying to make her way through a crowd of law enforcement officers, preventing her from, I think she's trying to get to Mayor Baraka, who they're arresting at the moment. And I guess, look, they're in physical contact and bodies bump up against other bodies, and I guess you could try to pretend that that's a slamming of one body against another, but that's not what people understand to be a body slam. Anyway, hopefully eventually they'll get embarrassed about these claims and drop these charges too, and they're just trying to be threatening and make people upset and annoyed rather than actually arresting anybody. I guess we also need to point out, it's spelled differently, but LaMonica McIver, like, I suppose there's probably no hope of keeping a McIver locked up in a prison cell anyway, because they'll just, turn available resources and found objects into an escape mechanism and be free within an hour. That's just what McIvers do, even though the spelling is different. Anyway, that's what I heard. But all right, here's the story from ABC News to give some structure to this. LaMonica McIver charged by DOJ over incident with ICE agents. The charges against Newark Mayor Ross Baraka were dropped. New Jersey Representative McIver was charged on Monday for allegedly assaulting law enforcement officers outside of an ICE detention facility earlier this month. Acting U.S. Attorney. Oh, that's right. We forgot that we can say acting U.S. Attorney. She's acting. Is he just not nominated or cleared the nominations on any of these people? Anyway, it's Alina Habba, his old defense attorney from the giant case that he lost 34 times over in New York, announced that she was charging the Congresswoman with assaulting and impeding a law enforcement officer. On May 9th, McIver, along with a few other members of Congress and Ross Baraka, the mayor of Newark, were protesting outside of Delaney Hall, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement detention facility. Tensions at the protests escalated, and pushing and shoving allegedly occurred. Representative LaMonica McIver, as Habba's statement said, assaulted, impeded, and interfered with law enforcement in violation of Title 18 United States Code Section 111A1. That conduct cannot be overlooked by the chief federal law enforcement official in the state of New Jersey, and that's me, even though you're only acting as that person. It is my constitutional obligation, constitutional obligation, to ensure that our federal law enforcement is protected. The poor guys. No one is above the law, politicians or otherwise. That's a joke for these guys, of course. It's the job of this office to uphold justice regardless of who you are. Now we will let the justice system work, Habba added. Okay. You might not be surprised to find out that Congresswoman McIver denies any such activity took place and has instead, I think rather correctly, pointed out, hey, this is actually super dangerous and represents an enormous expansion of claimed authority by the executive. And that too. This also another place in which the news media just doesn't really seem to have the tools to adequately describe what's going on here. I saw somebody again pointing out on social media as the mainstream media was saying this is a clash between the political branches, the executive branch and the legislative branch, and they're trying to push and redefine the boundaries of powers between the two and the different checks and balances one can have against the other. And it's really even it's not even that. I mean, there's no real reason to believe that this is a contest to try to find the normal boundaries between the two branches. It's one branch saying we're just going to disregard the idea that the people we're going to target everybody with big power moves and tell everybody that we can turn your life upside down and arrest you and charge you with federal crimes for almost anything you do that we don't like. And the fact that you are a member of a co-equal branch who has their own statutory, constitutional, and jurisprudential standards for immunity in ways similar that the president has. And of course, we just saw big lawsuits and Supreme Court rulings about the nature of that immunity. Congressional immunity exists too, and for good reason, as part of a check and balance against overreach by the executive, who's usually in charge of arresting people. Well, there are certain people you can arrest very easily, and others for whom you'll have to jump through further hoops because they are members of other separate but equally powerful branches of government. So, that's at stake, to be sure, but it's not over, normal boundaries between the powers exercised by the executive and the powers exercised by the legislative branch. They're just obviating all of that and saying, I don't like you. That's reason enough for us to be able to arrest you. But it isn't actually. And another way of looking at it, they're not actually claiming that power. They're instead saying, well, we should be able to arrest you for any reason or no reason. But okay, in this country, we're supposed to have due process and we're supposed to charge you with something. Let's just take some activity that looks like, well, that was a little tense, and say, no, it wasn't tense. It was criminal assault. Oh, well, sure. Now, but they are, looking for ways to dress up their activity as though it were a lawful exercise of constitutional power. So, they're not just outright saying, to hell with it. We'll just arrest her because we don't like her. So that's an interesting point as well. We'll have to watch how this goes and keep an eye on it. It's certainly troublesome all by itself and doesn't require any inflation into a larger or more worrisome situation. It's enough that some bumping and pushing gets raised to the idea that, oh my gosh, this member of Congress is some kind of terrorist. It's worse than 9/11, and we actually need to arrest her about it. Okay, that seems pretty wild all by itself. All right, a few other things. Let's introduce a couple other concepts along the way. There's some more news, I guess, more in-depth look at the latest resettlement of South Afrikaner farmers somehow into this country, which the Trump administration, presumably at the behest of Elon Musk, himself a former South African and whatever, are resettling white South African farmers as political refugees, that there is, as Trump says, a genocide of white people in South Africa. And if you were wondering, well, why haven't we heard more about that? Well, your first instinct as listeners to this show was probably to say, well, it must not be happening. That's why. Why is it not happening? Is it because we're not hearing about it in the traditional news media? That could be an indicator, but it's not our first guess. Our first guess is Trump said it was happening, so it's probably not. Well, the AP did a little digging, I guess went to some diners in South Africa to find out what was going on. Trump alleges, quote, genocide in South Africa. At an agricultural fair, not a diner, even Afrikaner farmers scoff. So, no, they don't actually think that that's what's going on. But to the extent it helps their friends and neighbors get resettled in America, I guess they're kind of okay with it. And have we changed the spelling of Afrikaner now to get rid of that second, really the third A, but the second A in a row? I always used to see, I thought I used to see it spelled Afrikaner, but maybe I was imagining things, or maybe things have changed as we're now respelling Turkey as well. Anyway, this is datelined Bothaville, South Africa, spelled like PW Botha, and I guess, I don't know, any relation there? Who knows? The reporter is, I would guess South African himself. Here's my best attempt at the byline here. Mogomotsi Magome. Apologies in advance for having ruined that. Dateline Bothaville, days before South Africa's president meets with U.S. President Donald Trump. He's coming to Washington at the White House this week. Afrikaner farmers at the center of an extraordinary new U.S. refugee policy roamed a memorial to farm attacks in their country's agricultural heartland, some touching the names of the dead. So is it happening? Is a problem occurring in South Africa? Yes. Who are the dead in the farm attacks in South Africa? Well, they're touching the names of those dead, both black and white. Can you imagine? It's actually happening to kind of people, maybe even without regard to race. Here in Bothaville, where thousands of farmers gathered for a lively agricultural fair with everything from grains to guns on display. Good agricultural fair. You got to grow your guns. Even some conservative white Afrikaner groups debunked the Trump administration's, quote, genocide and land seizure claims that led it to cut all financial aid to South Africa. Well, it seems it's not quite so true. And, one of the favorite activities of people in the midst of a genocide is, of course, agricultural fairs. You definitely want to try to have some of those just to remind everybody it's not so bad. You haven't been genocided, but maybe you will be later. And I think you should have some cotton candy now in case that happens later and you don't get a chance. I think it speaks to the weakness of the claim. But if you don't think so, you could just talk to the people at the fair and ask them, you're a white Afrikaner farmer. Do you think there's a white genocide going on? Nah, not really. Oh. All right, welcome back now to the Bothaville Diner here on Roots Radio. We're interviewing, or we're reading someone else's work, interviewing. I feel like an AI chatbot. I'm not actually doing this research. This time I'm not making it up. I'm pointing you to the AP, which decided to ask people not at the diners, but in line for corn dogs, presumably. I don't know. What do they eat there? Deep fried, corn battered, or I don't know what. The local fauna, I guess. All right. Well, they're at the agricultural fair in the middle of the big genocide, which is, by most accounts there, not actually happening this way. The bustling scene was, it's put this way, business as usual, which, ordinarily not indicative of ongoing civil war, genocide, etc., but it can happen side by side. Just the point here is that they're asking these people, is it happening side by side? And they say, for the most part, no. The bustling scene was business as usual with milkshakes and burgers. And, what's the pronunciation of this? Is it toe-headed children? T-O-W. Makes me want to think, I don't know, I've seen it before when I don't usually come up in discussion. But toe-headed makes it sound like your head is shaped like a toe, T-O-E. But is it tau? It makes me want to say that instead. I don't know. I don't say these things. But they threw in a little fancy wording there for your blonde kids. That is to say, the white Afrikaners and the kids being pulled in wagons. I don't know. It's just Whatever. The late President Nelson Mandela, South Africa's first black leader, stood in Bothaville, not during this fair because he's dead, but he stood there over a quarter century ago and acknowledged the increasing violent attacks on farmers in the first years following the decades-long racial system of apartheid. But the complex problem of crime on our farms, as elsewhere, demand long-term solutions, he said. Okay, fairly sensible. Some at the agricultural fair said fleeing the country isn't one of them. I really hope that during the upcoming visit to Washington, President Cyril Ramaphosa, and I'm not certain whether that's pronounced with a PH or a po, Ramaphosa, is going to be able to put the facts before his counterpart and to demonstrate that there is no mass expropriation of land taking place in South Africa, and there is no genocide taking place. John Steenhuisen, perhaps. Don't ask me to even spell it for you. But he's the Minister of Agriculture, and it's his hope that that's what will happen at Wednesday's meeting. So that's tomorrow. He can help out with that. He'll be part of the delegation for Wednesday's meeting. But I don't know what protocol is there, and he probably doesn't want to step on any toes. But just in case anybody's listening, I hope that our president will tell their president, nah, it's not going down like that. The minority white Afrikaner community is in the spotlight after the U.S. granted refugee status to at least 49 of them, claiming to flee racial and violent persecution and widespread seizures of white-owned land, despite evidence that such claims are untrue. Well, luckily they know that won't trouble our president, so what the hell? If we'd like to move to the United States, maybe we could do it and do it for free if they come and pick us up, if we say this is happening. While many at the agricultural fair raised serious concerns about the safety of farmers and farm workers, true, others were quick to point out that the crime targeted both black and white farmers and farm workers, as shown by South Africa's crime statistics. Tobani Ntonga, the black farmer from Eastern Cape province, told the AP he had been attacked on his farm by criminals. And not, he's not blaming us on this is a race war and the Afrikaner farmer neighbors of mine were attacking me because I was black. Criminals attacked me because they're criminals. And they almost kidnapped him, but a black neighbor intervened. And I guess here it is important to identify people by race just to straighten out that, the story as Trump wants it told isn't really happening. Crime affects both black and white. It's an issue of vulnerability, he said. Farmers are separated from your general public. That is, they're way out there in the sticks. They're alone. We're not near towns. We are in the rural areas, and I think it's exactly that. So perpetrators, they thrive on that, on the fact that farms are isolated. There you go. Somebody has just explained sensibly what's going on here. Other farmers echoed his thoughts and called for more resources and policing. That's interesting. And here in this country, we have, our farmers are fairly isolated too. And the more conservative among them usually say, well, we need guns at home, not only as working tools on a farm for various reasons, but also for protection because we're way out here on our own. And if, their favorite line being when you need help in seconds, the police are only minutes away, right? So it's an issue everywhere. It doesn't have anything to do with the end of the apartheid system or anything like it. It's just you're out in the sticks and you're on your own, and criminals know that. Crime especially hits small-scale farmers worse because they don't have resources for private security, said Afrikaner farmer Willem de Chavone Vroet. Wow. Gosh, you should see how these things are spelled. You can if you look up the article. I'll show you. Willem, Willem. That's the easy part. De, D-E. Chavonnes, de Chavon. No idea. Frenchy sounding rather than Dutchy sounding like the last name Vroet. VRUGT. Okay, sorry I'm mangling all of this. Well, anyway, he and other farmers wondered why they would leave the land where they had been rooted for decades. And that's usually their claim, right? To self-defense. And we're going to defend ourselves against attacks, whether racially motivated or otherwise, because no one's going to push us off our land. We live here. We settled it. I don't know how long ago, 100 years ago. Of course, there might be other people who say, I don't understand. Why should we have had to leave that land so that you could farm it? We were there before you. Yes. Well, still, all in all, I guess it just points out the absurdity in this guy's mind. Like, why would I flee to the United States? I want security where I live because I live here. And everybody should be, to some extent, guaranteed of security where they live. Starting right now, I guess. I don't know. Ramaphosa, a cattle farmer himself, also visited the agricultural fair for the first time in about 20 years to buy equipment, but also to do outreach to as many South Africans, this is in need of some editing, puzzle over the Trump administration's focus on their country. We must not run away from our problems, the president said during his visit. When you run away, you're a coward. I don't know if that was necessarily helpful in settling the jangled nerves and the situation to say, well, your side is a coward. The fast tracking of the Afrikaner's refugee applications has raised questions about a system where many seeking asylum in the U.S. can languish for years waiting. And that, of course, looming in the background. Very true and very problematic for us here in the United States. But just basically, this calls the whole structure of the program or the need for the program into question, and that's what we're really here for. By the numbers, down here it says violent crime is rife in South Africa, but experts say the vast majority of victims are black and poor. Not unlike what goes on here in the United States. Police statistics show that up to 75 people are killed daily across the country. And it's not great, but we're not doing any better. By the way, stats-wise, like if you advertise the real stats to the South Africans who are looking to flee here, I don't know if you're improving your lot per se, but yeah, I mean, I guess situationally speaking, if your neighbors have been attacked, and you say instead, I'm going to move to rural Idaho, where, for one thing, most of the people are white, and for another, the crime rate there is imagined to be much better. But although on a per capita basis, we sometimes find out that gun violence and crime rates per capita are worse where the population is sparse here in the United States, too. But, okay. Your results may vary and all that. Let's see. 12 murders occurred on farms in 2024, police statistics show. So that does put a different spin on things, right? 75 people killed daily across the country. That sounds like a lot. Doesn't sound like necessarily more than the United States, but I'm not sure. But when you look at it like, well, okay, but the farmers are being attacked in particular, and because they're white. Oh, tell me about that problem. Well, last year, 12 murders. I don't know, man. One of those killed was a farmer. So again, well, white farmers are being killed all over the place. 75 people are killed daily in South Africa. Oh, wow. How many of them are on farms? Well, 12, about one a month. Well, okay. I mean, they're isolated. What's the farm population? It's much lower, right? So maybe that per capita, it's very dangerous there. Yeah, so white farmers are being killed all over the place. All right, well, how many farmers were killed? I know you said 12 people were killed on farms. How many of them were farmers, per se? One. What? Are you seriously telling me that this whole refugee program is based on this enormous genocide that's going on? And how many farmers, the farmers, the white farmers in particular, are being killed? How many were killed last year? How much tragedy are we averting with this emergency program? One. How many were killed in total on farms? 12. What were the other 11 people doing there? Well, they were farm workers. or people staying on farms. Oh, and one of them was a security guard. As it happens, the data don't reflect the victim's race. But if I had to guess at the race of farm workers who were killed on these farms, that it would be a little more mixed. That would be my guess. Overall, across South Africa, last year, 6,953 people were killed, and thousands of people are killed. That's bad news. I don't know how it is per capita and whether the murder rate is better or worse in South Africa offhand, but someone could actually do that math and figure it out. Maybe they have. Government data also show that white farmers own the vast majority of South Africa's farmland, 80% of it, in fact, according to the 2017 Census of Commercial Agriculture, which recorded over 40,000 white farmers, one of whom was killed last year. The data, however, only reflect farmers who have revenue of $55,396 a year or more. They didn't say that, actually. They're being very specific. You have to earn exactly that amount. It doesn't say or more, but I'm sure that's what they mean. That excludes many small-scale farmers, the majority of whom, it turns out, are themselves black. So they just are written out of the class of farmers in general. Overall, the white minority, just 7% of the population is white, still owns the vast majority of the land in South Africa, which the World Bank has called the most unequal country in the world. According to the 2017 government land audit, white South Africans hold about 72% of individually owned land. Black South Africans own 15%. So it's a complicated situation in the sense that none of the claims that are being made are actually materialized or demonstrated in the statistics, which is, normally the way we would make such policy. I thought you might be interested in finding that out. All right. There are a couple other things. Speaking of the statistics, I have gotten a couple of emails from Jeremy Freiberger, frequent correspondent, and I haven't really caught you up on what he's been saying, but I guess I'll do it this way. In general, he had issued a warning and now has followed up a couple of times with evidence that the warning is perhaps coming true. Where were we on this one? Yeah, I got to find the right spot in our long and ongoing chain of communications here, and maybe this is the section I need to be in. But basically, he was saying, watch as economic indicators come in and are reported by the Trump administration, and I expect you'll start to see things like unexpectedly rosy reports on, jobs or consumer price index or those sorts of indicators, which are calculated by the government departments and which now being controlled by the unitary executive, it seemed very likely that the orders would go out from the White House. I want good news and only good news. And if the statistics don't bear out the good news, change the statistics. And yeah, I think that's kind of what you're starting to look at here. I think this may have, where did we start on this? Is it here or is it the next one? Here we are. Let's see. No, maybe even the one before here. There's a lot of emails from Jeremy at this point. Yeah. All right. Why don't I start here? David, he says, I started writing this comment to you on Saturday, and this goes back to late April, the 22nd. But I got distracted and never sent it. So very much like all of us, Jeremy. Meanwhile, so grateful that someone, Greg, in fact, finally mentioned that Musk/Dodgy's primary objective is the theft of government's vast stores of data. Data is likely to be the payback that Musk requested of Trump. We'll see. As for the Trump administration, it wants to rule over a mob-style patronage system. And to achieve this, let's see. Step 1, replacing civil servants with Trump loyalists. Step 2, dismantling the checks on executive and Republican power. And 3, creating chaos and dysfunction. But circling back, let's see. Is this in fact what we're talking about here? Well, he begins hinting at this, but let me jump to the next one in the section here, which just came the day after, on the 23rd. After watching the bond market stop Trump 2 weeks ago, and this is again back, he's talking about mid-April, and then watching the markets block Trump's desire to fire Jerome Powell, and then watching his corporate retail buddies at Walmart and Home Depot scare him further away from tariffs, I'm beginning to think that Trump's tariff dreams won't ever get fully implemented. With that said, I've heard you say on the show many times that Trump loves to engineer a crisis only to unwind that crisis and loudly take credit for resolving it. Meanwhile, and we're seeing that happen in even with the supposed deals, ding ding, being made in the Middle East, right? Most of them actually inked during the Biden administration, and he's just claiming credit for them and then doing hinky accounting with them. Meanwhile, we all know that the only thing of substance that Trump and Congress accomplished pre-COVID during Trump's first term was the giant tax cut for the wealthy. Otherwise, Trump simply rode Obama's solid economic recovery higher. So, what if Trump world, having figured out that their tariff plan is stymied, quietly drops the tariff debacle, passes the tax cuts, and simply lets markets return to chugging upward? Even if there's an intervening recession, Trump will be seen as a hero by most, right? Could that be the plan now or soon? Well, so far he doesn't seem to have mostly given up on the tariff thing, although he keeps kicking the can down the road with China. He's, manipulating the numbers. It's 145%. No, it's 30%. 30% still way too high. It's still much higher than they ever have been. But I did cut them down from 145%. Yay, I'm a hero. Well, guess what? Next thing to come up on April 30th, today some economic reports were released. ADP, the private company, automatic data processing, right? Frank Lautenberg's company, former Senator Frank Lautenberg, the late senator, it's not late anymore, but okay, I don't know. Usually you say late for some period of time, but he is still dead. ADP always releases its monthly payrolls report on the Wednesday before the government's monthly jobs report. Okay. Which always releases on a month's first Friday, Jobs Friday, as people say. Today is Payrolls Wednesday, April 30th was, and Friday, Jobs Friday. Payrolls and jobs are normally closely aligned. They tend to rise and fall together. I think everyone can see why that would happen. This month's ADP payrolls again showed a gain of just 62,000 private employees, the slowest rate of gain in 9 months. The median forecast called for 120,000 new private jobs, twice the actual amount that were shown, at least by ADP. Let's keep an eye on Friday's job report. Again, a Trump administration document. Meanwhile, the government's inflation-adjusted GDP growth for the first quarter showed a contraction of 0.3%, the first quarterly contraction since 2022, and following 2 years of 3% or better average growth. I wonder what changed, he asks parenthetically. The median forecast predicted a 0.4% gain, but the actual gain slightly less, 0.3%. Not the 3% we were having before, but 0.3%. Interestingly, the U.S. inflation rate fell to 2.4%, the lowest since September. Core inflation fell to 2.8%, below market expectations and the lowest since March of 2021. At the same time, consumer spending rose, allegedly, by 7.7%. That's some kind of interesting government report. That's more than 15 times the median forecast of just 0.5%. Lastly, pending home sales rose by 6.1%, 6 times the predicted 1% rise. Some of these numbers, especially when compared to the prior month, are in line with what might one expect. However, others appear cooked. Let's watch. And Jeremy signs off, but then comes back on the 5th. Actually, we were talking about the Canadian elections at that point and the pronunciation of defeated candidate Pierre Poilievre, if we like to put the R on the end. But back to consumers stuff. Today, now March 13th, Consumer Price Index report came out. Better than the analysts expected, according to Bloomberg. The hits keep coming, he says. Per Bloomberg, on the 15th, U.S. producer prices fell unexpectedly in April as margins shrank. If I'm correct, this is now 6 consecutive reports that were unexpectedly favorable to Trump. Go figure. So I guess that's still continues. Is there more here on this? No. Okay. Something else entirely at the moment. Or it was the last communication. But it reminded me of something else that maybe Greg would want to speak to tomorrow or Thursday. Similar to the economic reports, the Associated Press has this interesting news. It sounds like good news, but is it good news? Or is it news at all? The U.S. hasn't seen a human bird flu case in 3 months. Like since, I don't know, the Trump administration came in and put its own people in charge of this kind of reporting. Experts are wondering why. So is the question. We're so good at the health care, not the military. Your head will spin. We cured it all. We stopped everything. Or is it what they stopped? Just the reporting of these things. Mike Stobbe, Stobbe, and Jonelle Alechia, my guess on their pronunciations, get the bylines for the AP. Health officials are making a renewed call for vigilance against bird flu, but some experts are puzzling over why reports of new human cases have stopped. So again, health officials are like saying, well, watch out for bird flu. And Trump administration officials will be saying, why? There isn't any. So I'll be fired if I tell you why. Just be on guard, is basically what they're saying. Now they'll be fired for that instead. Has the search for cases been weakened by government cuts? Is that the case? Are immigrant farm workers who have accounted for many of the U.S. cases more afraid to come forward for testing amid the Trump administration's deportation push? That could be it. Is it just a natural ebb in infections? That could be it. Or is it, you're not allowed to report them no matter who comes in and says they have bird flu, right? Stop the testing, you'll stop the cases. That's how he handled COVID, right? It's not a mystery. It's not a guess to say that it's Donald Trump's policy preference to lower the numbers of cases by refusing to report the ones that exist. That was his solution to COVID. We just don't know why there haven't been cases, said Jennifer Nuzzo, N-U-Z-Z-O, director, or it could be Nuzzo, if you pronounce it the Italian style, director of the Pandemic Center at Brown University. Oh, it's Ivy League. Get rid of it. It's DEI. And also the name of the university is Brown. So you tell me what's happening here. I think we should assume, she says, the normal person at Brown University, we should assume that there are infections that are occurring in farm workers that just aren't being detected. Yeah, that's, I guess if you don't want a problem, but you have to say something truthful, you say it that way. When you say detected, do you mean we're not detecting, people have it, and we're just not detecting, our tests aren't picking it up, or are they not being detected like the tests say they have bird flu, we're just not reporting that? Is it not being detected at the office? I didn't detect any infections. The tests equipment did, but they didn't tell us about it. So we're not detecting anything. Who knows? The H5N1 bird flu has been spreading widely among wild birds, poultry, and other animals around the world for several years, and starting early last year became a problem in people and cows in the U.S. And we asked the cows members of Congress what they felt about it, but, couldn't understand them. In the last 14 months, infections have been reported in 70 people in the U.S. It's not, not a whole lot compared to, like, say, the number who are murdered in South Africa, for instance. 70, it's less than 6,000. But in the last 14 months, infections reported in 70 people in the U.S., most of them workers on dairy and poultry farms, as you might expect. One person died, like in South Africa, but most of the infected people had mild illnesses. The most recent infections confirmed by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, such as it still exists, were in February in Nevada, Ohio, and Wyoming. In other words, before the Trump administration was able to replace everybody handling the reporting from top to bottom and replace them with new people. California had been a hot spot. I'm sure he was happy to report that, with 3/4 of the nation's infections in dairy cattle, but testing and cases among people have fallen off. At least 50 people were tested each month in late 2024, but just 3 people were tested in March, 1 in April, and none in May so far. State records show, but that is a state record. That is of interest, or at least, our understanding of what's in those state reports, which may or may not be coming through a federal filter. Overall, the state has confirmed H5N1 infections in 38 people, none after January 14th. Now, there's a possible natural reason for bird flu cases to be down. During a call with U.S. doctors this month, one CDC official noted that there is a seasonality to bird flu. Cases peak in the fall and early winter, possibly due to the migration patterns of wild birds that are primary spreaders of the virus. So maybe, but also maybe not.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, finally battling with the very delicate mute button here, but we're back. Hey, how was your break? So when we left off here on the Kagro in the Morning Show on Netroots Radio, we were just pointing out there is a reason to expect a natural decline in cases as the traditional, if you want to call it that, or the demonstrated pattern of cases spiking, peaking in fall and early winter, and then falling off in spring, might have to do with, that would explain lower numbers, I guess now, although it isn't really helpful for January, February, but I guess birds on the move. Anyway, it is unlikely that severe human infection requiring hospitalization would go unnoticed, though, in all of this. So, under normal circumstances. So, again, that either means, maybe this has to do with the natural pattern, that we're just not seeing the level of infection that would could never escape legitimate detection and monitoring, but maybe just nobody is ending up in the hospital with this and they're just not reporting it. I think it's a good point to point out, like, for instance, most of the farm workers are going to be immigrants, and whatever their legal status, you now have to worry about if you go to the doctor to get treated for an illness, that you'll just be arrested and deported, whether you're here legally or not, or a United States citizen or not. So you're going to want to avoid any, venturing too far abroad from the farm where you're relatively safe because they're not hunting for you there, unless you've been targeted because you're a local Democrat and you own the farm. You get the idea. Anyway, so yeah, there's a natural reason for it. Also, they point out a patchwork system that monitors viruses in sewage and wastewater has suggested limited activity recently. So if that data is is clean and has not yet been manipulated, that may also show, there's a decline in circulation of the virus. New infections are still being detected in birds and cattle, but not as frequently as several months ago. Given the fact that the number of animal infections has fallen according to USDA data, if that is real data, then it's not surprising that human cases have declined as well, said the CDC in its statement. What about our government cuts affecting bird flu monitoring? Dr. Gregory Gray said he wasn't concerned about the CDC not identifying new cases in months. I don't think that anybody's hiding anything, said Gray, who wants to, I guess, keep his job. An infectious disease specialist at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. But Osterholm, we missed the introduction of who Osterholm is. That's Michael Osterholm, a University of Minnesota expert on infectious diseases. Osterholm and others say it's likely that at least some milder infections are going undetected, and they worry that the effort to find them has been eroding. Resignations at the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the FDA's Center for Veterinary Medicine could slow the government's bird flu monitoring, said Keith Polson, director of the Wisconsin Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory. 3 of 14 experts accepted deferred resignation offers at the National Animal Health Laboratory Network, which responds to disease outbreaks with crucial diagnostic information, he said. They are among the more than 15,000 USDA staff to accept the offers, an agency spokesperson said, and dozens of staff were fired at the FDA's Veterinary Laboratory Investigation and Response Network, which investigates animal diseases caused by problems including contaminated pet food. Cats in several states have been sickened and died after eating raw pet food found to contain poultry infected with H5N1. Angela Rasmussen, a virologist at the University of Saskatchewan in Canada. Oh no, not Canada. Said targeted surveillance has really dropped off precipitously since Trump took office. She wonders if immigrant farm workers are too scared to come forward. I can't argue with anyone who would be risking getting shipped to a Salvadoran gulag for reporting an exposure or seeking testing, she said. You got to get that opinion imported from Canada these days. Okay. I'll just give you the headline of the next section just so you don't worry too much. CDC, and I think they're probably right about this. Whether or not we can still trust them, I don't know. But the CDC says the risk to the general public remains low. I would be curious whether Greg would agree with that. They characterize the risk to the general public as low, although it is higher for people who work with cattle and poultry and who are in contact with wild birds. And that's probably true. And it has to do with the way probably the disease is manifesting in people who contract it. Doesn't seem to be resulting in hospitalizations in very big numbers for humans. But you can make it worse for yourself by ignoring everything, screwing around, drinking raw milk, etc. So there's some risk for people who want to engage in risky behaviors, I guess, or for people who are forced to engage in risky behaviors by the nature of their work. If you're drinking raw milk, that's probably just up to you. They do have pasteurized milk for sale in stores, and it's cheaper than the raw stuff. So you might look into that. All right. Definitely a couple other subjects that I wanted to return to. I feel like I got to put this one on the record quick, but nothing is ever quick. The Guardian has a story about, an angle on the Salvadoran gulag story mentioned by the Canadian Veterinary Health Monitor. Lawyers for Venezuela, a lawyer for Venezuelans deported to El Salvador's prison has been arrested. Ruth Lopez, being held without access to lawyers, ironically enough, at a secret location, because why not, and accused of embezzlement a decade ago. What's happening here? The Bukele regime in El Salvador essentially finds this person to be an annoyance and looking into human rights abuses and the treatment of prisoners at the giant Sikot prison and elsewhere, becoming too much of an annoyance. And so, give me some reason to arrest and detain her somewhere incommunicado, because it's her communicatoing that's really giving us the problem. What do we got on her? Maybe have something, maybe you don't. But if you don't, make something up. How about, maybe, I don't know what the truth of it is. She was accused of embezzlement a decade ago. Thomas Graham and press agencies in San Salvador contributing to this piece again in The Guardian. The head lawyer of a human rights group representing the families of Venezuelan immigrants imprisoned in El Salvador after being deported from the United States has been arrested. Ruth Lopez, an outspoken critic of President Nayib Bukele, was detained late on Sunday under an order from the prosecutor's office, which accused her of, quote, embezzlement when she worked for an electoral court a decade ago. The human rights group Cristosal said in a statement. The prosecutor's office confirmed the arrest in a post on X, of course. Lopez runs Cristosal's Anti-Corruption and Justice Division and has been a vocal critic of Bukele's sweeping arrests of 85,000, mostly young men, without due process, if that sounds familiar, under the state of exception that began in 2022. I guess that's their version of the state of emergency or martial law. I don't know. Neither Lopez's family nor her legal team knew where she was taken after police removed her from her home shortly before midnight on Sunday. That's called arresting her, I guess, but I don't know. Removed her from her home. They weren't evicting her. They just put her in restraints and took her to an unknown location. Wink, wink. That's not an arrest. The authorities' refusal to disclose her location or to allow access to her legal representatives is a blatant violation of due process, the right to legal defense, and international standards of judicial protection, Cristosal said in a statement. The arrest is part of an accelerating government crackdown on civil society and the free press, as Bukele is apparently emboldened by his close relationship to the Trump administration, which is paying El Salvador to hold deported immigrants in its prison system. Earlier this month, 7 journalists from the investigative news outlet El Faro, who had exposed details of Bukele's alleged deals with the country's gangs, had to leave the country after they were tipped off that the government was preparing arrest warrants for them. Many other journalists and activists have already fled. In 2023, El Faro moved its business and legal operations to Costa Rica. Last week, after protesters gathered outside Bukele's house, he accused NGOs of, quote, manipulating them and proposed a bill to tax 30% of all contributions to NGOs, echoing a law passed by Nicaragua's autocratic government to silence its critics. And, do you remember that earlier in the program we were talking about the possibility of reviving and reintroducing into the big, beautiful bill Trump's ability to do something similar, although in his view, or in our case, we would just wipe out the NGOs entirely, not just tax them. Shortly after Lopez's arrest, Andres Guzman, Bukele's presidential commissioner for human rights and freedom of expression, they have one, announced his resignation without giving a reason. Oh my. In a statement, international organizations said they were deeply concerned, like Susan Collins, at the increasingly pervasive environment of fear that threatens freedoms in the country and called on U.S. policymakers, good luck, and the diplomatic community at large to urge President Bukele to cease all attacks against human rights defenders. Well, we should, but I find it unlikely that we will anytime in the near future. All right, let's see. I mentioned yesterday something we got started on, and I suspected that, we ran out of time, but I suspected that had we been able to continue, everything's lagging here today. All right, we'll open it up and pocket differently. But you remember that I had begun an article saying that the Republicans had tried to find a way around the filibuster for a certain provision they were trying to deal with. Oh boy, okay, the lag is going to affect every window now, huh? All right, this was the Slate piece by Mark Joseph Stern, and we just didn't, we were explaining things or reading it, and it sounded like, hey, this isn't really to do so much with the filibuster as the Congressional Review Act, but we just didn't read far enough. So we'll begin again and then delve further into the situation. Republicans think they have a way to blow up the filibuster without anyone noticing, which is also interesting. Mark Joseph Stern wrote on May 14th, going on, so it's like 6 days ago, in Slate. Throughout Joe Biden's presidency, just to give you the background again, Republicans decried Democratic threats to reform the Senate filibuster. Remember this, right? They fought tooth and nail to maintain the 60-vote threshold for legislation, working with centrists like Joe Manchin to thwart much of Biden's agenda. When they took over the chamber in 2024, these same Republicans promised to protect the filibuster. Now they're poised to deal it a shattering blow. Senate Republicans are quietly preparing to carve a huge new loophole into the filibuster at the behest of the fossil fuel industry, never as good, dramatically expanding the chamber's ability to change the law with a simple majority. Their immediate target is a long-standing waiver that allows California to set strict vehicle emission standards, but the consequences of their actions would extend much further, circumventing the 60-vote threshold on a vast array of controversial issues and laying the groundwork to pass bigger chunks of Donald Trump's agenda by majority vote. The GOP's current crusade against the filibuster is the result of fierce lobbying from the fossil fuel industry, especially the American Petroleum Institute, against California's stringent emissions requirements. The Clean Air Act expressly permits California to set its own higher standards with approval from the EPA. In January, at the end of Biden's presidency, the EPA granted the states waivers, some waivers. They granted the state waivers to impose a package of strict requirements designed to accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles. Weeks later, though, after Trump took over the EPA, the agency concocted a scheme to repeal those waivers and bar California from obtaining waivers in the future. Now, congressional Republicans seem ready to give the president a necessary assist. This plan rests on a bold evasion of the filibuster. Trump's EPA and Senate Republicans want to repeal California's emissions standards under a law called the Congressional Review Act. This statute allows Congress to nullify rules that were recently issued by federal agencies. And remember, I was saying, well, I thought we weren't recent enough. I thought, it had to be done in 90 days, and we're past 100. What happened? So the statute allows Congress to nullify rules, note that were recently issued by federal agencies, and to do so with a simple majority in each chamber, bypassing the filibuster in the Senate. Once the president signs a CRA repeal into law, agencies are forever barred from passing any regulation that is substantially the same as the one Congress nullified. Republicans claim that the California waivers qualify as an agency rule, subject to repeal under the CRA. And so they're racing to kill it through a mechanism that would, in theory, prevent the EPA from ever granting such a waiver again. But guess what? It's problematic. Why so? Well, first I have to go back to the pocket version in order to get to this. I forgot that this was the case. We run into the paywall over at Slate, justifiably, but what can I tell you? So what was happening here? Well, here's the issue. Republicans have a problem. An EPA waiver, which is what's on the table here, is clearly not a rule. Is it clear? It's clear to us. Is it clear to them? It's not a rule, and it's therefore not subject to fast track repeal under the CRA. So it's more hair splitting here. What's going on? In 2023, the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, decreed that EPA waivers to California are not, quote, rules and are exempt from the CRA's reach. The GAO also held that even if the waivers were rules, they would fall under one of the CRA's exceptions. So repealing California's waivers would usually require the 60 votes in the Senate to overcome the filibuster. It seems that the GAO's definition of rule doesn't, for the CRA purposes, doesn't include things like these waivers. And even if you did think of it as a rule, I'm sure there are Republicans out there, well, what do you mean? I mean, the EPA says this has to happen this way and everybody has to obey it. Isn't that a rule? Well, even if we did consider it a rule, it turns out that the Congressional Review Act has exceptions to it that you can't address as a rule. And this apparently, for whatever reason, maybe the article will explain it, would be included in one of those exceptions. The Senate has long deferred to the GAO's determinations on this topic, but to hell with all of that, because this time GOP lawmakers chose a different path. They plowed ahead with the repeal of California's emission standards anyway. The House purported to nullify the waivers in late April. Now, Senate Republicans are preparing to do the same via a mere majority vote. In March, the GAO reiterated that the waivers are not subject to CRA repeal. The Senate parliamentarian agreed. It's case closed, right? You can't, Republicans can defy the parliamentarian, or will, regardless. The Senate parliamentarian agreed, ruling that waivers are not rules under the CRA and are thus subject to the filibuster. Her edict left the GOP with one last course of action. Use the nuclear option to overrule the parliamentarian, bypass the filibuster, and kill the waivers without Democratic support. Senate Republicans are now preparing to do just that. According to Axios, GOP whip John Barrasso is corralling votes to, quote, go nuclear. He says so. With help from Senate Environment and Public Works Committee Chair Shelley Moore Capito. A staunch ally of the petroleum industry, Capito engineered the failed effort to repeal the waivers through the CRA in 2023. Former Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, a longtime defender of the filibuster, who promised that it would remain very secure, quote, very secure, after the November election, is reportedly on board. Isn't that something? The institutionalist. That's just crazy. Why? I heard he was a never-Trumper now. John Thune, the current majority leader, has expressed openness to a vote, and moderates like Senator Susan Collins have not closed the door on overruling the parliamentarian. I'm deeply concerned that the parliamentarian is very, very wrong here. It is difficult to overstate the ramifications of such a move. The Senate would be radically expanding the CRA to encompass far more agency actions than the law was ever intended to cover. It would do so by asserting congressional authority to redefine every action taken by the executive branch as a rule that could be repealed through the CRA by a simple majority. So that's interesting. I'm sure that, I guess the congressional Republicans think we're pushing back on the executive. We're seizing more power. It's not that the other way around. Except that they're only saying they're seizing that power as against the now departed Biden administration. They would never get away with or even try to do this, I'm sure, to the Trump administration, the current president. A diverse coalition of interest groups has warned of some likely targets, including energy infrastructure permit approvals, approvals of corporate mergers, or approvals of particular drugs. Congress could use the CRA to kill an energy project cleared by the government. No energy project will be cleared by this government, though. It could nix a corporate merger or attempt to overturn the denial of a merger. It could reverse the Food and Drug Administration's approval of a medical treatment, like, say, mifepristone, the first drug in a medication abortion, or even a vaccine. Oh dear, that would be something, wouldn't it? And these repeals would bar the targeted agency from ever taking a substantially similar action again. I don't know whether that would hold, but that's the thinking. If courts disagree that they with the assessment of the Congress that the things that they acted against were in fact rules, like if they're interested in the evidence presented by the GAO, but maybe they wouldn't be. Congress can, in theory, override an agency at any time, but it must do so through legislation, because it's the legislative branch. That's subject, of course, to the Senate filibuster, unless they nuke that too, which they could. So maybe there's no grounds for complaint here. We could be just eliminating the filibuster altogether, and that might not even be a bad thing. But of course, the CRA was crafted with the idea in mind that it'll go on to explain why it was passed, but it was passed with the idea in mind that the filibuster would remain intact and this would be a carve out from it. But I don't know if the full powers of the CRA ought to be, or whether the people who wrote the CRA would have been comfortable leaving in the hands of Congress or leaving under the authority of the CRA the repeal of everything without any requirement of the filibuster, being available to anybody during the regular legislative process as well. I don't know. It's a little bit odd and speculative, but Congress, as they point out, can in theory override an agency at any time. They just have to do it through normal legislation. The CRA was crafted as a narrow exception to that process, but if it was broadly applicable to anything, what would be the point of any agency rulemaking at all? Now Republicans seeking to transform the law into a cheat code that Congress can exploit to enact startlingly broad changes to the law without reaching 60 votes in the Senate. Federal agencies issue an array of regulations and guidance every day. It's an authority delegated to them by Congress as well. They adjudicate disputes on a dizzying variety of issues, from securities regulation to labor to immigration, agriculture, food safety, education, energy, the environment, and so much more. If the GOP prevails in the battle over California's waivers, it will empower Congress to overturn everything an agency does on matters monumental and minute, and permanently prevent it from doing anything similar in the future, all by simple majority. Yeah, that is problematic. There's a little bit more here. Realize, of course, that this is not something that they would intend to use against any rules made under the Trump administration, that simply would lie in abeyance until the next Democratic administration, if there ever was one, and Republicans would then seek to undo everything. Would that power be available to Democratic Congresses as against the Republican president? In theory, but as you know, golly, that just seems out of keeping with normalcy, and we love normalcy, and we don't look back, we look forward. And so, once again, the rule breaking preserved between administrations by the Republicans in Congress. We're the only ones who dare to do this, and we only do it against Democrats, so it's not an issue being used against us. Why stop there? As a matter of fact, the question is put. Public citizens Amit Narang told me, Mark Stern, right, that on Wednesday, that the war on California's waivers may be just the beginning of Senate Republicans' assault on the filibuster. Narang, an expert on the CRA, believes that this skirmish has become a test case for future defiance of the parliamentarian. This would lay the foundation for the filibuster to become meaningless, he said. Yeah. That foundation's already been laid, but okay. The pressures will be especially acute as Republicans attempt to pass their massive suite of tax cuts and Medicaid rollbacks through reconciliation by majority vote, a top priority for Trump, what he calls it, the giant stupid bill. We have no assurance whatsoever that they're going to just overrule the parliamentarian this one time and never again, Narang told me. That's long been known. The battle lines are already taking shape. Republicans are eager to insert a gargantuan wholesale reversal of federal regulation into their reconciliation bill. The provision, known as the REINS Act, R-E-I-N-S, would terminate countless other existing rules and make it exponentially more difficult for agencies to issue new ones. The parliamentarian is almost certain to reject the REINS Act's inclusion in the reconciliation bill, subjecting it to the filibuster instead. But this measure is another high priority for the fossil fuel industry, which may well pressure Republicans to overrule the parliamentarian yet again to circumvent the filibuster. That is, a bird rule point of order could be brought against this thing, which normally takes 60 votes to waive. But what if they just nuke the bird rule either entirely or for the purposes of this one inclusion? Could they do it? Yeah. Could they always have done it? Yeah. Could Democrats have done it? Yeah. Do Democrats ever dare do it? Rarely. but they have been known, of course, to carve out certain exceptions. Have they been encouraged before to carve out even more exceptions? Yes. Have they ever dared to do it? No. Anyway, the consequences, he gets towards the conclusion here, could spill over well beyond that. Charlie Ellsworth, partner at Pioneer Public Affairs and former budget staffer to Senator Chuck Schumer, everyone's favorite, told me that, like Narang, he foresees more attacks on the filibuster if the CRA gambit succeeds. If the 60-vote threshold can be suspended to undercut California's climate laws, after all, why couldn't it be altered to enact the base's more urgent desires, including a nationwide abortion ban? Republicans are teeing up a world where they're going to have to respond to the craziest passions from their base with no defense from the filibuster. I don't think he's pointing out they won't be all that comfortable with this stuff either, but those guys may be on their way out the door anyway. They're teeing up a world where they're going to have to respond to the craziest passions from their base with no defense from the filibuster, only their own political calculations, Ellsworth told me, and I don't think that's a position they want to put themselves in. It is, however, the position they are enthusiastically backing themselves into. If Congress succeeds in killing California's waivers through the CRA, the state could challenge the repeal in court as a violation of the statute's terms, but a separate provision of the law purports to bar judicial review. Its meaning is not entirely clear, but some courts have interpreted it to prohibit courts from second-guessing Congress's actions under the CRA. And they could just strengthen that bar if they want. California would have a messy fight on its hands, and even if it somehow prevailed in a hostile Supreme Court, the Senate would have already crossed the Rubicon. Disarming the filibuster is a meaningful constraint on the majority's power in a way that could easily be repeated as litigation works a winding path to the high court. Throughout the 2024 campaign, GOP senators shouted from the rooftops that they would preserve the filibuster if they won back the chamber. Thune, in fact, kicked off the current session by pledging from the floor that he would keep the 60-vote threshold in place. But Trump has long pressed Senate Republicans to blow up the filibuster to enact his sweeping agenda. Soon, the president may finally get his wish, not with a bang, but with an end run cloaked in procedural camouflage. The best kind of camouflage, if you ask me. All right, time now for us to give up the mic to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Next, right here on Netroots Radio. Keep it here, and you'll hear the following.
Netrootsradio.com.
After this.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Oh, we're in a mystery. Trump gave up in a humiliating surrender before the world. Let's find out what that's about. And on the rest of the menu for today, a federal judge just struck down Dodgy's attempt to seize the $500 million building owned by the U.S. Institute of Peace. Yeah, nullified the whole thing. Let's see what that means and how it takes shape in the real world.